Melissa sat quietly at her desk, her eyes focused on the endless pile of papers in front of her.
Really?
The copy room was small, tucked away in the back of the office, far from the bustling activity of the higher floors. She didn't mind. It gave her peace, a chance to work in silence. Her clothes were simple, blouses in muted colors, slacks that matched. Nothing about her stood out, and that was exactly how she liked it. Most people in the office barely noticed her as she passed by with stacks of documents in her arms, a quiet "excuse me" escaping her lips as she slipped through the crowd. To them, she was just the copy girl, a low-level employee with no real importance. It was fine with Melissa. She had been with the company for years, but no one ever bothered to ask about her. She didn't mind. She wasn't there for recognition. Her work was her own, and that was enough for her. Then, there was Derek Stone. He had only recently been appointed as the CEO, but it didn't take long for everyone to notice him. Derek was loud, brash, and had a way of making sure people knew he was in charge. He was always dressed in expensive suits, his cologne strong enough to make his presence known long before he entered a room. He talked endlessly about power, success, and how anyone who wasn't climbing the corporate ladder was wasting their time. To Derek, status was everything. He spoke of class as if it were a language only a few understood, constantly belittling anyone who didn't fit into his world. He had made it clear from the start that he didn't have time for people like Melissa, the low-level workers, who barely mattered in his eyes. One afternoon, during a company-wide meeting, Derek's arrogant attitude took center stage. As he addressed the room, he noticed Melissa standing in the corner, silently organizing papers for a presentation. He sneered, his voice dripping with disdain. "Someone get the copy girl to make sure the slides are ready," he said loudly, with a laugh, not realizing the room had gone silent. "Can't expect us to look professional without someone handling the basics, right?" A few nervous chuckles echoed through the room. Melissa stood still, her eyes steady and calm, though there was a strange strength behind them. She didn't flinch, didn't show the hurt that a lesser person might have. She simply nodded and continued her task, the weight of Derek's words hanging in the air. The others in the room exchanged uneasy glances, but no one dared to challenge him. After all, Derek was the boss now. After the meeting, Melissa returned to the copy room, her footsteps quiet on the polished floor. The words Derek had said still echoed in her mind, but she didn't let them show. She simply got to work, running the copier, sorting papers, and making sure everything was ready for the next round of presentations. She didn't allow herself the luxury of reacting, not with anger, not with frustration. There was no point. Her task was simple, but she gave it the care it deserved. After all, someone had to keep things running behind the scenes. Someone had to make sure the company's foundation stayed intact, even if no one noticed. As Melissa was organizing the last batch of documents for the day, a voice broke the silence. "Hey Melissa," it was Oscar, the janitor, a quiet man with kind eyes. He always had a smile for her whenever their paths crossed. Oscar had worked at the company for years, long before Derek had come in with his flashy ideas and sharp suits. He had seen the company change, and he had seen people come and go. "You don't let them get to you, do you?" Oscar asked gently, leaning against the doorway. Melissa glanced up, offering him a small smile. "I'm fine," she replied, though the weight of the insult still lingered. Oscar chuckled, shaking his head. "I know you're strong, but there's more to you than just this copy room, right? People don't know who you really are." Melissa didn't answer right away, her fingers still working the papers in front of her. She didn't want to explain. There was no need to, but Oscar wasn't the type to give up easily. "I've been working here a long time," he continued, his voice lowering as if sharing a secret. "I've seen a lot. You're not just some temp. You know this company inside and out. They have no idea what you're really capable of." Melissa glanced up at him then, meeting his gaze. She knew what he meant, but that was exactly the point. No one had to know. "Thank you, Oscar," she said softly. He smiled and nodded. "Just keep doing what you do, Melissa. The world's full of surprises." As the days passed, the tension at the company grew. A new project was about to launch, and everyone knew how much it meant to the future of the business. Derek Stone, ever the showman, made sure everyone knew that he was under pressure from the board to secure a major investment to keep the company afloat. The rumor mill buzzed with talk about a big deal, and Derek loved to brag about how close he was to landing the investor who could save everything. This is it, he boasted one morning in a meeting. I've got the biggest investor on the line. Once they sign, we'll have everything we need to take the company to the next level. His chest puffed out with pride as he spoke, unaware of the eyes watching him. But as much as Derek liked to talk, the deal wasn't finalized. He was scrambling, trying to secure the investor's signature, and it was becoming clear to those around him that the pressure was taking its toll. Meanwhile, employees started noticing something odd about Melissa. She wasn't just the quiet copy girl anymore. She seemed to know things she shouldn't. She asked thoughtful questions whenever she passed by, often inquiring about details from different departments. She would chat briefly with marketing, then head over to operations, her questions probing, specific. Some of the staff exchanged confused looks. Why would Melissa, of all people, be asking about budget allocations or product timelines? She worked in the copy room. For goodness sake, she was supposed to know the paper stock, not the intricacies of the company's upcoming launch. Still, no one dared question her directly. It seemed strange, but there was something about Melissa, a calm authority, that made people second-guess themselves. What was she really up to? And more importantly, why did she seem to understand the company better than anyone thought? The morning of the big meeting was tense. Whispers filled the hallways as everyone from the senior executives to the lower-level employees knew something significant was happening. An emergency meeting had been called with no warning, and everyone was on edge. The company had been struggling under Derek's leadership, and the board had made it clear that this unknown investor could be the key to saving the company from financial ruin. Derek, of course, was thrilled. His voice echoed through the halls as he bragged about landing such a powerful figure. Once this deal goes through, Derek had said the day before, we'll be unstoppable. The future of this company will be in my hands. I'll be the one to lead it to greatness. He couldn't stop talking about it. He painted a picture of success that everyone around him, despite their reservations, couldn't help but buy into. The board was watching closely. They were desperate for a solution, and Derek was all too eager to show them that he was the man for the job. He imagined this meeting would be his moment to shine. The room was filled with the company's most important people, executives in expensive suits, their faces tense with anticipation, waited for the investor to arrive. Derek stood at the front, his posture tall and confident, a smile playing on his lips. His excitement was palpable, but there was something unsettling about the way he paced back and forth, as though trying to calm his own nerves. Melissa had heard the whispers about the meeting, but she hadn't paid much attention. She continued her work as usual, quietly observing the employees as they prepared for the big day. She knew something was about to change, but she had no intention of being a mere observer anymore. As Derek eagerly checked his watch, the door to the meeting room swung open. The room fell silent. Everyone's eyes turned toward the entrance. Derek's smile faltered for a moment, his gaze locking onto the figure standing in the doorway. It was Melissa. She wasn't in her usual plain clothes. No, today she wore a perfectly tailored suit, one that fit her like it was made for her. Her hair was neatly styled, and her posture was commanding. She walked into the room with a quiet confidence, her eyes scanning the room as if she had done this 100 times before. For a moment no one moved. The silence in the room was thick, everyone too stunned to speak. Derek's jaw dropped. What is she doing here? He whispered under his breath, confusion flickering across his face. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. Melissa, the copy girl, the quiet, unassuming woman, who had never once raised her voice, was standing in front of them, like she belonged in this room. She walked forward, unhurried, and all eyes followed her, wondering what was happening. Without missing a beat, she stood beside Derek, who was still frozen, clearly struggling to process this moment. Melissa cleared her throat, her voice steady and composed as she addressed the room. "Good morning, everyone. I'm Melissa Quinn," she said calmly, her eyes sweeping across the executives in the room. "I'm the majority shareholder and silent partner of this company." A collective gasp went through the room. It was as though someone had just turned the volume up on the world. No one had known. No one had even suspected. How could they have? Melissa had always been so unassuming, so quiet. She had never hinted at any such involvement. Derek's face turned pale as he blinked in shock, his earlier confidence completely gone. His mouth opened and closed as he tried to form words, but no sound came out. "I didn't know," Derek stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. His eyes darted between Melissa and the rest of the room, disbelief written all over his face. Clearly, Melissa said with a slight smile, though there was no warmth behind it. I've been watching from the sidelines, observing, and now it's time for things to change. The room was silent, the air thick with tension. Melissa stood tall, her presence undeniable. Derek, the man who had been so sure of himself, who had treated others with such disregard, was left speechless, his arrogance replaced by confusion and fear. Everyone had underestimated her, and now it was clear. Melissa was not just a quiet employee, she was the one who held the real power. As the room sat in stunned silence, Melissa remained calm, her eyes unwavering. She had known this moment would come, but even now, as Derek's face paled, she couldn't help but feel a deep sense of justice. This wasn't just about the company, it was about something far bigger than that. Her thoughts drifted back to her father, the man who had founded this company from nothing. He had been a visionary, someone who understood what it meant to build something with integrity and heart. But the weight of his success had come at a cost. Melissa's father, Joseph Quinn, had always kept her out of the public eye. She had grown up in the shadow of his brilliance, never quite knowing how much of his world she would inherit. To the world, she had always been his daughter, his secret. She had been kept hidden, away from the spotlight, given the freedom to live without the pressure of expectations. But when her father passed away suddenly, the company was left in turmoil. Despite his immense success, he had never truly put the mechanisms in place to safeguard the future of the company. There was no clear heir, no obvious successor. His will was vague. He had left the majority of his shares to Melissa, but she wasn't named as the public face of the company. Instead, she had been left with the responsibility to manage it in secret, hidden behind layers of bureaucracy and deception. Melissa had chosen to stay in the shadows. Her father had always told her that understanding the culture of the company was just as important as running the business itself, and so she had quietly stepped into a role, unseen by the others, an observer more than anything. She took a job in the copy room, far from the executive floors. No one suspected her of anything more than being an unimportant low-level employee. She wanted to see how people treated each other. She wanted to witness firsthand the way the company operated, not through the polished reports or meetings, but through the daily interactions, the way staff worked behind the scenes, how employees were treated, how Derek Stone's leadership had affected the culture. What she saw disgusted her. Derek's reign had been nothing short of toxic. He treated lower-level employees with disdain, dismissing their contributions as insignificant. He had ignored feedback from the people who kept the company running, focusing only on the bottom line and his own image. His sense of superiority was overwhelming, and it didn't take long for Melissa to realize how much damage had been done. She had seen Derek openly belittle the janitors, dismiss the concerns of the mailroom staff, and mock anyone who didn't fit his idea of success. Employees were afraid to speak up. The company's culture had turned into one of fear. With Derek at the center, a man who believed his worth came from his title, and not his character. Melissa had been documenting everything, every inappropriate comment, every unethical decision, every instance of mistreatment. She kept detailed notes, storing them in a secure file that only she had access to. She had seen the cracks forming in the company's foundation, and she knew that something needed to change. But she wasn't going to be the one to make a scene. Instead, she was biding her time, waiting for the moment when she could step in, not as a daughter or an outsider, but as the one who could fix it. And now here she was, revealing herself to the very people who had underestimated her. The board had always known who she was. They had been aware of her involvement from the beginning, though they had never mentioned it directly to Derek. In private meetings, they had discussed the state of the company, and they had been waiting for Melissa to speak up. They knew she had been observing, waiting for the right moment. The board had been quietly rooting for her to make her move. As Melissa's revelation hung in the air, Derek tried to regain his composure. His arrogance flared once more, as he attempted to backpedal. "I didn't know," he stammered, trying to salvage what little pride he had left. "I wasn't aware you were. I didn't realize." His words faltered, as the reality of the situation sank in. He turned to the board, desperate. "Look, I've done what I could. I'm the one who's been pushing the company forward. I've been securing investors, making tough decisions. You can't just throw me out like this." But the board was already moving. They had seen enough. Derek's time was up. Without a word of hesitation, the board chair stood, his voice firm. Derek Stone, your leadership has not aligned with the values of this company. We cannot continue under your management. You are hereby removed as CEO, effective immediately. The room was still. Derek's face flushed with disbelief, but no one moved to defend him. The power had shifted. Melissa stood tall, her voice calm, yet commanding as she addressed the room once more. The company needs a leader who understands all levels of it, not just the ones at the top. We will build this company back up, not on fear and arrogance, but on respect and integrity. Derek's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. The confidence he had carried with him so boldly now seemed laughable. As he was escorted out of the room, his arrogance gone, Melissa turned to the board, ready to lead the company into a new era, one where respect, not status, would define success. As Derek was led out of the room, a heavy silence fell over the board members and employees who had witnessed the dramatic shift in power. No one spoke immediately. The weight of what had just happened was still sinking in. The arrogant CEO, the man who had once acted as though he could do no wrong, was now nothing more than a figure of the past. And standing at the front of the room, Melissa Quinn, the woman who had spent so many years in the background, now had the floor. Her gaze swept across the room, at the people who had worked tirelessly, who had built the company brick by brick, who had been dismissed, belittled and ignored under Derek's leadership. These were the people who truly understood what it meant to keep a company alive. These were the people who had quietly carried the weight of it all. Taking a deep breath, Melissa began to speak, her voice steady but filled with emotion. We've all seen what happens when a company is led by someone who believes in titles more than people, she said, her eyes scanning the room. I've spent years watching as employees were ignored, as their hard work went unrecognized, as their contributions were belittled by a man who thought only those at the top mattered. I know because I was one of those people. I was here in the copy room, in the mail room alongside the janitors and the junior staff, learning the true heart of this company. A murmur ran through the room. People were listening now, and there was a sense of hope, a spark that hadn't been there before. I watched as the janitors swept the floors, but they were the ones who made sure everything ran smoothly. I saw the mailroom clerks sort through mountains of paperwork, without a single thank you, yet they kept everything moving, quietly making sure that deadlines were met. And I saw the junior staff, working late hours, pouring everything into their work, with no reward but the satisfaction of a job well done. Melissa paused, her eyes softening, as she looked at the employees who had worked so hard, often without recognition. You see, she continued, this company is built on teamwork, not just the work of those at the top. It's the janitors, the mailroom clerks, the staff in every department, the ones who carry the real load. They are the ones who make this company what it is, and they've never once asked for recognition. But now I will make sure their voices are heard. I will make sure they know their value, because they are the backbone of this company. There was a deep silence, followed by a soft, steady applause. It wasn't forced. It wasn't out of politeness. It was real. It was the kind of applause that came from the heart. People had been waiting for a leader who understood them, who recognized their worth, and now they had found that leader in Melissa. Oscar, the janitor, stood at the back of the room, his hands clasped in front of him. His face broke into a proud smile as he listened to Melissa's words. He had always known she wasn't ordinary. He had seen the strength in her, even when no one else had, and now that strength was being acknowledged. As the applause grew louder, Melissa turned to the board and spoke once again. From today forward, this company will be run with respect, with integrity, and with a focus on people. We will foster a culture of trust, where every person, from the top to the bottom, has a voice. We will work together as a team, and our success will be shared by all. The board members, many of whom had quietly supported Melissa from the sidelines, nodded in agreement. The room was alive with energy, with the promise of change. Melissa was officially announced as the new CEO of the company. The transition was swift, and there was no hesitation from the board. They knew this was the right decision, the only decision. Derek's departure was final, his arrogance and disregard for the people he should have valued now, a thing of the past. As Derek was escorted out of the building, humiliated and defeated, Melissa stood tall, the weight of leadership now settling on her shoulders. But for the first time, she felt ready, she felt sure, she knew this was her moment. And it was about more than just her. It was about every person in the company who had been overlooked, who had been mistreated. The company began to shift. Slowly but surely, policies were put in place to ensure that employees at every level were heard and respected. Managers were encouraged to engage with their teams, to listen, to create an environment of support. The focus moved from mere profits to building a workplace culture that valued kindness, empathy, and hard work. And as Melissa stood in her new office, looking out over the city skyline, she knew this was just the beginning. This wasn't about titles, it wasn't about power, it was about leading with the heart, understanding every level of the company, and creating something sustainable, something real. The company had entered a new era, one where true leadership wasn't defined by what you had, but by how you treated others. And Melissa Quinn, the woman who had once been invisible, had become the leader they had all been waiting for. Thank you for joining us in this incredible journey of transformation and redemption. Melissa's story is a reminder that true leadership comes from understanding and valuing every individual, no matter their role. It's about respect, kindness, and creating a culture where everyone can thrive. If you enjoyed this story and felt inspired, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe for more powerful stories like this, and comment below with your thoughts. We'd love to hear from you. And of course, share this video with your friends to spread the message of respect and leadership. Thank you for watching, and stay tuned for more amazing stories coming your way.